Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the UK Deaf Leadership Summit webinar live. My name is Craig Crowley. I have a name sign that says CC, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Action Deafness, a deaf charity here in the UK. Welcome to you all. Today, I have a very important guest, Mr. Markku Jokinen. He is the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the Finnish Deaf Association. He has also worn two previous hats that I'm not yet going to talk about, but we are here to host this webinar. First of all, should you have a question, please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat, and I will pick them up accordingly and ask that of Markku. And Markku has his own particular name sign as well. So Markku, welcome to the UK Deaf Leadership Summit.
Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to this.
Excellent. Markku, tell me about you, the first deaf leader of the World Federation of the Deaf, WFD, as well as the European Union of the Deaf, the EUD. You have been past president of both. Tell me about that.
The World Federation of the Deaf, WFD. Well, first of all, I will be mixing international sign, and I hope you will understand me. I'm not that familiar with this signing. First of all, I was president for the WFD for 8 years, between 2008 and 2016. And when it comes to the EUD, European, I was president there until the times of COVID. COVID made it impossible for us to hold the general election. So I was supposed to be the president for 2 4-year seasons, but then COVID-related restrictions made it to be 9 years. I was vice president for the WFD before I got the presidency. And after the elections, I got elected to be the WFD president. There were a few people who asked me to get into the EUD as well. But first of all, I want to state that this has been, as they sign in Spain, both of these positions have been voluntary positions. I used to work for Finnish University, and after that I have been working as the CEO in the Finnish Association of the Deaf. And alongside that, I have been holding these voluntary positions in the WFD and EUD.
Which makes you a very busy person indeed. So you've undertaken those positions on a voluntary basis. We will talk a little bit more about that. But first of all, I want you to talk about your growing up years. What was it like for you at school? What was it like for you as a young person? Tell us your story.
Maybe I won't be telling my whole life story.
Okay.
But I'll share bits and pieces here and there. During the times when I grew up, well, first of all, I'm second generation deaf person. I have deaf parents. Both of my parents are deaf, and through them, I got a sign language as my first language. I grew up in a small village I'm not a city person at all. I grew up in a small village, and both my parents were really active persons in the deaf clubs, local deaf clubs. And that's the place where, for example, my mother used to say always that you have to keep in mind the other deaf persons during your life. You have to remember who they are, the ones who face hard times or might be alone. And all of those times when we went to deaf festivities, for example, my mom used to pick up all of those people. And for example, she said that there is this lady who lives far away and in a farm, so we have to now go and pick her up so people can get to deaf parties or whatever festivities that were going along. And my mom used to pick up and drive them, of course, back to their homes again. So that's what I got from my early days, that you should never forget other deaf people. And of course, I got sign language through my parents. Well, I didn't go to a deaf school. I went to mainstream school. And that was because my parents, well, they saw that I was a fast reader. I learned to read, for example, at the age of 5. And my family thought that, well, maybe it's better to put me to the local mainstream school. It wasn't easy, just to say. I didn't have any interpreters, and it was oral education in that sense for me. But the important thing was that around the age of 10, I realized and I learned how to read best, so to say. It wasn't reading of words. I learned to look beyond the words, and I started to understand what the words actually means and what is meant by different phrasings. So I learned a lot through reading, because I didn't get that much through the education in the classroom. So that was the key thing for me when I grew up.
That's pretty incredible. You grew up with deaf parents. You were educated in a hearing school. The contrast between the two, but you had acquired deaf culture because you're out there in the deaf clubs, you're socializing with sign language, so you've acquired that culture. And then to go into an educational setting, which is substantially different. Now, did you think of it back at that time as being two different worlds, or did that come to you later? Like, how did you feel about those two situations? Looking at your school life, your family life, possibly your university life, what was that aha moment for you? When were you impacted?
You took the next step by posing that question. When I was around the age of 15, 16, you know, that's the time when you think about who you are, which community you belong to. Is it the hearing world or the deaf world? We sign identity like that. That's the time when you start thinking about your identity. Well, deaf sports actually helped me a lot. Maybe around 60 kilometers from my village, there was a deaf sports club. And I was a sports person. I used to swim. I did cross-country skiing. And well, I also competed with hearing people. I was used to competing with them, but of course there were communication struggles, and it was always after the race. It was boring because I didn't have anyone to talk to. And signing was, of course, for me, always what connected with people, even though the sports level between deaf people was not that great. Well, after school, I thought about going to the university, but before that, I wanted to take a break. I worked for the Deaf Association. There was a woman who became pregnant, and during her maternity leave, I got the position to work as a youth officer. So that was my job before the university. And that the famous Liisa Kauppinen, who was the executive director back in the days, powerful lady, we all know, she was my boss. And she actually looked at me and saw that, well, Markku is actually a promising young person. And she decided to establish a training program for people of my age, youngsters of my age, with the aim of becoming future leaders. That there were training camps over the weekend for many of us. And actually, out of the bunch of people that got trained back in the days, quite many of us work as leaders now. And during those weekends, I realized that sign language actually is a language. I got the awareness of sign language as a language that equals the spoken language. And that was the big aha moment for me. I can say that my mind exploded, so to say. I have a culture. What? How can it be? We as deaf people have a culture. That was a big aha moment for me. And through that, I discovered my identity. And it actually changed the way I perceive the world. And that's sort of being the key for my life.
How old were you for that particular aha moment?
I could say I was 21.
Interesting. I am sure that there are many deaf people that have faced that kind of crossroads regarding their own identity. Mm-hmm. Where do they go? What do they do? What direction are they going? And always needed guidance, support, mentoring. Now, there's different words here that I'm using that I'm going to come back to later, but you spoke about Liisa Kauppinen and with her own particular name sign. Now, later, she became the president of WFG. So we're talking about that same person. So obviously, she was the one to inspire you to create that kind of impression on you, as well as many others worldwide. She has impacted it so many, including myself. What a remarkable woman. So, however, you got to learn directly from Liisa.
That's correct. I'm now 63 years old, and when you requested me to come to this interview, it actually made me look back in time. What has life brought me? And Liisa actually is one of the key persons in my life. She used to be the CEO in the Deaf Association before, when I worked in the university. And when she retired, her position was opened, and there were few other deaf people who applied for the position. I got selected for the position, and so to say, Liisa has guided me in my life. She has invited me to her networks and explained a lot about the world to me. What's relevant in our national context, for example. So she's amazing, and she has given a big gift to me, so to say.
I would agree with that, because I remember you going back possibly more than 35 years showing our
30
age here.
to be correct. 30.
Let's say let's go with 30 years. Now I have to say that you were the one that impacted me regarding identity, which means that other people in other ways experience things differently, but our paths have crossed considerably over the years, and you will find other people saying the same thing. But what you have just described has been a beautiful experience. However, moving on, you are very passionate and have a very strong belief in the issues of human rights and the recognition of sign languages. Of course, Lisa promoted that, lobbied for it, campaigned for it. You took on all of her issues on board on behalf of the world. Markku, why did you decide to do that? Why did you decide to pursue the issue of human rights?
That's a big question. That reminds me of a Swedish deaf man called Lars-Åke Wikström. And the interpreter got the name right too. Perfect. I can't just finger spell with your.
And I'm just spelling the name in BSL as well.
Yes, yes. This is his sign name, Lars-Åke. Both of actually have the same initials as Lisa Kaupinen also has. Lars-Åke and Lisa. They knew each other pretty well through the Nordic cooperation, Nordic Council of the Deaf, that has been a working network for around 100 years already. And Lars-Åke, back in the days, he was aware of the social system, power structures, how to lobby, how to do advocacy work. He was a really powerful man in that sense. And he actually explained me that you should always look at the system, political systems, administrative systems, laws. You have to, in order to change something, you have to change the systems. And that's the only way we can make our lives better. And I know that we will be discussing about the topic of leadership in a few moments. He was the one who made me look at the bigger picture. Where does the power lie? You should always try to look for the bigger pictures over your everyday work and things you do on the everyday level. So that was a big thing. Actually, Lisa and Lars-Åke both did, and they were great leaders in that sense. And I want to mention that we all have our different styles of leadership, and you have to always, in order to become leader, you have to build your own way of leading through the knowledge you gain from other people. So everyone is individual in that sense. So we all have our own ways of leading.
Okay, I would agree with that. You talk about those who have influenced you, and you've named two of them, as well as there are others. There will others that are there that will have also inspired you. So that would mean you just have this pure, absolute, heart-beating passion regarding the rights of people using sign language. So you've got yourself involved. Lisa stepped down. You took over WFD. You became proactive. You created an agenda, and that was sign language rights and human rights. And you became that powerful force. Now, you gave the analogy of standing at the top of the mountain so that you've got that overview. Can you describe that experience you had with yourself and other deaf leaders within WFD, and how were you successful in your time as WFD president?
To start up with the WFD first, I'll come back to the EUD in a second. Well, during my period in the WFD, that was the famous moment when we got the UNCRPD. So the UNCRPD work was done when I stepped back. Of course, Lisa was already involved in leading the process that led to the recognition, the UNCRPD. We had 3-week-long meetings in New York around that time. I almost became a New Yorker during my time, or when we negotiated the UNCRPD. We had in the board, in the WFD, we had the clear aim that we have to include sign language related issues, interpreting deaf culture related issues in the or topics in the UNCRPD, and those were the great achievements we aimed for. And over time, that became a great tool for all of us. Of course, I want you to know that it wasn't only the work we did in the board or with the staff, what I did as a president. The strategy, the aims came all from the deaf people, meaning that in the 4-year, well, in our general assemblies every 4 years, we always discuss about the important topics, and we always want to follow what the communities want to achieve. Nothing comes from top down. The deaf associations are the ones who elect us and who reach the goals for every 4-year period. And in the General Assembly, we select the board, and everything comes from the deaf communities to the board. So we can say that the deaf communities are on top of us. We are not the ones who decide. We serve people in the WFD. And we work for the, well, for what the deaf communities desire, what they want us to aim for. So it's not Markku on top of the deaf people, it's the other way around. In the deaf clubs, we have annual meetings that agree on the action plan, and there we select boards. Everything comes down to the deaf communities, and that's a thing actually that I always explain when I travel abroad. Everyone says that you're the president, you're the big guy. No, it's actually the deaf people. You are the one who go first, not me as a president.
I think that is the most wonderful way of explaining that kind of concept. I'm not talking about deaf here only, I'm talking about any type of organization. You always think of your position as being top down, whereas you are looking at it from a very democratic point of view, that it's people first, and then you as the leader is then down at the bottom of the scale. What a fantastic analogy to use. Now, you have led WFD, and what was your greatest achievement during your term as WFD president?
During my term, well, before this interview, I thought about these achievements, and one of the achievements, of course, is the UNCRPD. That's one of the biggest. There are a lot of things, but somehow they all come down to the UNCRPD. I remember that in 2006, I was in New York, and we had the meeting that handled the UNCRPD. After we got the achievement of the, and I went outside from the meeting, I was walking with Elisa Kaupinen, and we just shared the short moment that, can you really realize that our 5-year work is now gone? The UNCRPD is finished, and we can, well, you know, there are other people who can continue our work from here. So in a sense, everything comes down to UNCRPD in my eyes.
Pretty incredible. I can actually feel the hairs on my arms raising by the way you've just described that very difficult, challenging journey for you. But because of you and Lisa, both of you led this, but you did it quietly. There was no ego attached to the way you did your work. You were very careful, very strategic. Both of you have led this huge difference. Now, you, Markku, personally must have felt that sense of relief, that sense of achievement. That sense of achievement, did you bring that with you to EUD, or was it different?
When it comes to the EUD and I got selected, EUD was had a vision. We couldn't walk in the dark, so to say, and our vision was to get the recognition of sign languages across Europe. At that time, we didn't have that. So in the board, we got the vision that all of our member countries should recognize sign language in their legislation. So that was the #1 goal for us to work towards during those terms. And actually, we live in the moment where each of the EU member countries have recognized sign languages in their legislation in one way or another. So, well, you could say that our work never ends, but we work with that vision in our mind, and we thought that our work in regarding recognizing sign languages will never end. But well, the day it came when we realized that we have achieved that goal, and now it's the time for other persons to continue with their goals. So that's one of the achievements we got during my term.
Both incredibly different successes. Now, looking at your audiences, what makes for a good leader? What does it mean for you?
Yet another big question. To give you a brief answer, maybe me, also you, Greg, all of us who are participating in this event today, all of us need to see the big picture first. It's not about those simple goals. Only after seeing the big picture, you can start prioritizing. Well, we have short lives, so we cannot achieve everything. We have to be able to prioritize. And I might repeat myself here. It's not us who decide, it's the deaf people who decide. When we write our action plans, for example, in the FAD, Finnish Association of the Deaf, before that, we always go and reach the deaf communities, deaf clubs across Finland, in their gatherings, and discuss about the problems people are facing, discuss about the ways we can solve those problems, and envisioning what's good life for different people. We have 37 deaf clubs in Finland, and we always go and reach for deaf people in order to get a list of different topics. You know, Finland is a big country. From south to north, it's 1,200 kilometers long country. So we have a lot of roads to travel, but only after those meetings we can create our action plans that actually is discussed in the General Assembly every year. And based on those discussions, we agree on our strategic goals. So it's those topics, important topics to work with, do not come from our own head. Those come from the deaf communities. So you need some sort of a vision always, the bigger picture. You have to be creative. And maybe you have to be also flexible in deciding the ways you travel. People need some sort of empowerment. They need to be inspired. They need to be, we have to be able to make them believe that they also can. And we have to be collaborative when we discuss about different topics. And that creates synergy. It's hard to lead if you don't have people around you. Of course, everyday work is hard too. You, Greg, are more than well aware of how tedious it can be, but you need to be merciful also for yourself. You have to take time away from work. You have to do sports. And those are the moments when you relax and you become more creative again.
You're right. Every single thing that you are uttering is so true. What you have is positive attitude, assurance, and you see leadership in that way. And I think you're absolutely right. It is all about balance, your lifestyle, your work, leisure, play, and also empowering and inspiring others. And I think you've given a very good description of how you perceive leadership. And you also spoke about feelings. Now, do you have a feeling about the future? Do you see positivity in terms of so many other deaf people becoming leaders? Or do you still have a feeling that there is a need for more, not so much the word training, but to have more role models, to see more deaf role models out there? I'm not just talking about here in the UK, I'm talking about worldwide. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's an important topic you just raised. During my terms in the WFD and EUT, I could say that, well, that's 25 years. And during those 25 years, I've seen change. It's not only about EU countries recognizing sign languages, it happens worldwide. there are more university trained deaf people, deaf leaders, there are deaf business people, businessmen.
Yes.
And the creative side, arts, is also very much alive. We are 70 million deaf people in the world. And well, there are many of us who have no access to education, who face oppression, who don't have interpreter service. In the WFD board, of course, they work a lot in making those lives better. But here in this audience, I think we have seen the world change. And of course, what happens in Ukraine at the moment, we live quite close to our neighbor. We share 1,300 kilometer border with our neighbor. There's democracy is in crisis, energy is in crisis at the moment. Before that, we faced the times of COVID and COVID crisis. And well, as a consequence, the remote interactions have increased a lot, but I think all of us are pretty aware of the ways that the traditional topics that link to interpreting service and education, the need for improving educational issues, we have faced whole new palette of topics to work with. How do we prepare for war, for example? What if we face power cuts? How do we inform deaf people if that happens? So we are facing a whole new set of crises that we didn't expect before. We are facing climate change. There are a lot of refugees that Europe is facing at the moment. And now that we have the war in Ukraine, there are a lot of refugees coming to our country. So that has made us to rethink about our visions and what we need to work with. Of course, the energy problems, the war has made us to prepare for different topics. We have, for example, the 72-hour rule here in Finland. Our government has informed us to store enough food, batteries, and water for 3 days, should we face some sort of crisis. And what are the different steps? How do we inform different people? We have to be prepared for 72 hours. And we have a law for, I don't know what's the word in English, but bomb shelters. So we have places where people can gather in times of crisis. Peaceful times in Europe are gone, and now Russia wants to invade. It's nothing to be afraid of or to be scared about. There's no room for panicking, but still we need to be prepared for everything, and we need to prepare for crises, and we weren't aware of those before these times.
What you are describing is quite incredible when you look at the world at crisis, based on what you have just described. And I do think you're right. There are huge concerns for the world over. And I also think you're right in saying, what is it that the deaf leaders can do? How to cope, how to plan for any potential crisis, and how to manage all of that, as well as, from what I can see through social media, the World Wide Web, Facebook, Twitter, they are huge influencers, regardless if it's a positive or a negative. It's the fact that there's information going on through those platforms. If you look at our times 30 years ago, it is substantially different. It is just crazy and wild how technology has grown so significantly. Based on all of that, we still have to be mindful of the importance of deaf leadership. And there's one word that you have said is preparation. Any potential opportunity, any potential crisis. And you are right when you say that. You also spoke about solidarity, which I think is also important, essential for us as deaf leaders. Now, sometimes you know that there is strong deaf solidarity, but then there are times when there is a disengagement. When that happens, that becomes very hard for deaf people and deaf leaders. Do you want to respond to that?
Linking to solidarity, social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, they are good for engaging and having discussions. Before, people thought that social media makes more social, but the research has shown that it actually can be used as a weapon for disagreeing. So I agree that social media is good, but the solidarity still has to remain. We are a small community. We can't afford to lose people. We need to be solidar. We need to have the solidarity remain.
I totally agree with you. Good point. Another thought comes to mind, and that is in the area again of deaf leadership and social media influence. But as you know, deaf leaders take different forms in the business, in the arts, in the world of work, in government. We have that, but it is the fact that sign language opens those doors because of the official recognition being given the world over. Now, you and Lisa opened those doors because of the UN CRPD convention. It was critical in achieving that. So this is what you've done. Do you have any thoughts about the future of sign language and human rights issues in general? What's your thoughts on that?
I think in Finland and also in the UK, I hope it's on the one hand, it's about the language and culture perspective. And I think we have too much focused on the issues of disability and deaf people as disabled people. So in that context, accessibility is not about language access. People perceive deaf and hearing impaired people as disabled. And yes, on the one hand, through the UNCRPD, we belong to that category, okay? But the UNCRPD also talks about us from the linguistic perspective. And we really need to be perceived as a linguistic community. I grew up in deaf family and I grew up amongst deaf people, but I never really talked about my hearing status as being the priority. there are a lot of different topics we can give to the world. We are not always the ones who are receiving. We have to keep in mind that aspect as well. And disabled people, persons, we are deaf people, belong to that category too. And we have things that we can give to other persons in the world. Of course, there is a lot to share. A lot of things we haven't actually shared yet. A lot of skills we can share. A lot of, well, sign language itself, for example, is a great thing we can use and educate other people.
What a wonderful summary. Just wow. There is one question being asked of you, and it's with regard to Lars. And that is regarding policy, government, and the fact that you have had the successes. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
I hope that all of us deaf people will study more politics, linking and how the politics links to our issues, how we can lobby our way through, and it needs leaders. Again, Lisa is a great person in this. She's a diplomat by heart. For example, one time we were in the UN for the CRVD meetings, and the topic of discussion had to do with the recognition of sign languages. There was a big, well, China and their delegates were against it. And in UN, you always have to reach 100%.
Wow.
Of agreeing votes. So there were a bunch of Chinese delegates. And during break, Lisa reached those delegates with interpreter. There was a government representative from China, and Lisa had a meeting with the person and asked that, well, how can I help you in this? So it was not about being aggressive in any sense. Lisa posed the question as, how can I help you? And the delegate said that, well, if we recognize sign language, we have to have a lot of interpreters, and we have so many sign languages here in China. We don't have only one sign language. So in our meetings, there will be 1 million of interpreters present in every meeting. So Lisa said that, well, at the moment, how many interpreters you have in your parliament? The person responded, well, only 1 or 2. Lisa said, well, that's a good step, and maybe in the future you can book more interpreters. So that's not a problem for you, as I perceive it. Well, after the break, the meeting continued and sign language recognition passed. So, and when I was young, I used to reach for conflicts and be more, argue more. But now I perceive that it's more about agreeing and reaching the common ground. So arguments,
you're right.
They don't work.
I have to say, you are a very modest person. You're very modest. That's in your nature. That's what makes you Markku. However, for the longest time, you have been an inspirational leader. And I am not the only person to say this. I am not the only person to say this. There are so many the world over will say the same. I'm only one of them. At the same time, I think it's important for our audience to know that you are an all-rounded natural leader. To be natural is important. You're also very practical. You are balanced. You're diplomatic in relation to politics. You might have to grit your teeth in getting the end results that you want, but you have succeeded. You are a very careful diplomat, and the audiences may not know that you're also a deaf Olympian gold medal skier. Let's not forget that. So you are an all-rounded, skilled person. For me, it is an absolute honor for you to be here today as part of our UK Deaf Leadership Summit webinar. I am inspired. I hope our audiences will be inspired by once they see this recording. You are an all-rounder.
I'm Finnish, a shy person, so I'm just thinking that I hope what I said was fine.
I am aware of that, but I feel it's important for me to say that because you deserve this. You deserve this. You have just done so fundamentally well for the deaf community worldwide. You deserve the accolades. Markku, thank you. And I think that's it. That's all of the questions. So is there any final words for you, Markku? Is there any final words of inspiration to our future leaders?
Well, first of all, thank you, Craig, for inviting me here to share my experiences and thoughts with you. I always learn from other people. It's impossible to achieve anything on your own. And just recently, I was in Spain. Spanish Association for the Deaf invited me to Spain for a few days. And we talked about leadership and system in the Spanish context. They have national, regional, and local associations. When I was president of the WFD and the EUD, back in the days, a lot of disabled people said that you have a great system that comes from local associations to national associations to the European level and then back to the global level. And this system means that anyone can actually become WFD presidents. You have the ladder to climb. Any individual can reach that. For other disabled people, it's not that easy. So we as deaf people are truly global, belong to a truly global community. The local level is important, but it always has to be, and it always has been connected with the global level. So that struggle other disabled people face.
Interesting.
And I have to say that we live in hard times. It's hard in Europe, but it's hard across the globe. We in Europe, for the first time, are facing hardships. So we shouldn't give away our hope. We still can survive if we are connected and if we rely on the solidarity. So these hard times will pass. We will solve our problems and build towards a better future. Thank you.
Excellent summary. Thank you so much, Markku, for your time. You have been the most wonderful guest on our live webinar. To our audience, this now completes our webinar. There will be further webinars as part of this series. The recordings will have subtitles, and that draws our session to a close. But thanks again, Markku, a wonderful, inspiring orator. Good luck for your future. Good luck to you.